I'm sure you've all seen a G-Wagen, but I'm also sure that most of you have not seen a G-Wagen like this. This is the newest and the coolest version of the Mercedes-Benz G-Wagen. It's the G580 with EQ technology. It has the longest and dumbest name in the lineup, but it is the most interesting, at least for me, because this is sort of a resto mod from the factory. Obviously, it has the classic G-Wagen looks, but it is the latest generation of the G-Wagen, and it is all electric with 4 electric motors, 4 transmissions, and a low ratio mode, which makes this incredibly unique in the electric world. Let's take a look. Let's unpack the name a little bit first. Mercedes has been calling their electric and electrified vehicles EQ for a while, but rather than calling this the EQG, they decided to call this the G580. So logically, this slots between the base G-Wagen in America and the AMG G63 in terms of pricing, performance, pretty much everything. But instead of simply using a version of the frame that we find in the G-Wagen, because this is a body-on-frame SUV still, they decided actually to give it a completely different frame, and that's how they accommodated the 4 electric motors. And no, I'm not kidding, this has 4 electric motors, 4 2-speed transmissions, and that gives you the ability to do things that you just can't do in other electric vehicles. We're going to dive into why we have that complex technology in this vehicle, of course, in this video. But you should know that it looks basically like the rest of the G-Wagen lineup, and apparently that is exactly what G-Wagen shoppers were interested in. So we have these high-mounted turn signals up here, very distinctive, the round headlights here. We have a different grille, of course, with the illuminated rim around there, but a lot of the same styling cues, the same shapes, same ride height, essentially, from the regular G-Wagen. That all translates over here into the G580. And that includes what's going on, or rather not going on, underneath the hood, because under here, you won't find any sort of storage area. I find that a little bit sad since this was designed to accommodate a twin-turbo V8 and a rear-wheel drive transmission. I'm a little bit sad that they didn't find some way to relocate those components and give us at least a small storage area, but that's pretty in keeping with even the ground-up electric vehicle designs from Mercedes. Now, under the body, again, we have an all-new frame. That's because we have a 116 kilowatt-hour lithium-ion battery pack under here. Yep, it's a pretty big battery, even though range-wise, we're talking real-world about 200 miles if you treat it gently. Theoretically, almost 240 miles according to the EPA. Obviously, that's because this is a big, heavy box. It weighs nearly 7,000 pounds, and aerodynamically, it is a little bit changed versus the regular G-Wagen, but not a lot. You can see, definitely still very, very square. But the other reason we don't have a front trunk is because of the motor design. Again, quad electric motors. Each one is good for 145 horsepower, 215 pound-feet of torque, giving this a total of 579 horsepower, 859 pound-feet of torque. The thing with independent electric motors is, of course, that we don't have the ability to send that cumulative torque to a single wheel. Think about this for just 1 second. If we're talking about a regular G-Wagen with a center locker, a rear locker, and a front locker, if 3 wheels had no traction and all of the lockers were engaged, you would be able to send effectively 100% of engine torque and horsepower to a single wheel, be that a front wheel or a back wheel. Of course, minus system losses, which are going to be relatively inconsequential. Big thing though, you can send all that power to a single wheel. And then of course you can multiply that by the torque in the 2-speed transfer case. Electric vehicles like this, there's a bit of a limitation. One electric motor can just deliver 145 horsepower, 215 pound-feet of torque. So if 3 wheels were slipping, 1 wheel would be down to that number. You have 2 ways around that. You could give this really insane electric motors, and that's what we find in the Rivian lineup. Over 200 horsepower per wheel, actually over 250 horsepower per wheel, because that's how we get to that over 1,000 horsepower mark. Or you could do what Mercedes has done, and they give each individual wheel motor a 2-speed reduction gear. That allows each individual wheel motor to deliver about 400 pound-feet of torque. Whether or not that is simpler than a locker arrangement, I don't know, because that's what Mercedes could have done. They could have given us maybe a 200 or 300 horsepower electric motor on each axle, and then a mechanical locker, but that's not what we find in this G-Wagen. It will attempt to imitate lockers and effectively torque vectoring differentials as well, sending power around to all 4 corners when needed. But the 4 electric motor thing, that allows it to do what has torn up my driveway in this section right here And I didn't realize how badly this would tear up my driveway until I had done it, so we'll talk about that next. The concept of a 4-motor EV doing a tank turn is not new, and here's how that would work. With the wheels straight ahead, you would simply turn some wheels forward and some wheels backwards, and you'd pirouette around in a circle. But it's not exactly easy on the trail or on the driveway or on the drive line. Sorry, the car just decided to lock itself, and I will show you that now. Of course, once we get in here for the interior section, I will go over in a bit greater detail about how to actually get this going, but right now we are in the low ratio mode. Once that is engaged, it will stay in low ratio mode until you turn it off, including parking. So I'm gonna go ahead and seat belt myself in, and I'm gonna close the window because things are gonna get dusty here in just a moment. I engage the mode. It has agreed to the engagement. I'm gonna pull a paddle down and let's turn around. Now, as you can see, I have created some brand new ruts in my driveway, an awful lot of dust, and there's probably a reason that Mercedes wants you to keep the wheels pointed straight ahead. And that's because if you are on a little bit of a camber, and there is a little bit of a slope here in my driveway, you can end up sliding down the hill. Now, the other thing you could do with 4 electric motors that's a bit less dramatic, a little bit more useful, is you can drag a rear wheel, overpower another rear wheel, and actually go around corners a little bit tighter. This is an improved version of what we see in the Ford Bronco, which uses kind of the same trick, only without the electric motors, so it doesn't turn quite as tightly. Although it's not the most regular. Something like a 4-wheel steering system would definitely let you cut a more predictable corner. The other difference is a little bit less noticeable. We have a smoother and armored underbody to the G-Wagen, which Mercedes says is actually a little bit better protected than the regular G-Wagen model, especially because it's nearly flat. We have a different suspension setup too. We have an independent suspension up front, it's pretty similar, and then in the back we have a Didion tube arrangement with the 2 electric motors in the rear. Weighting ability has gone way up to 32.5 inches from the factory thanks to the battery pack, and Mercedes did say that it could actually go further if you didn't care about air getting sucked into the HVAC system. So if you decided not to have an HVAC system anymore inside, that would be air conditioning and heating, you could probably wade all the way up to the roof if you had the windows open, and of course, didn't care what happened later. Of course, I doubt that many first owners are going to do that sort of thing in their G-Wagon, so it's probably not that big of a deal that we only have a single recovery hook location there. As you can see, the lighting arrangement, everything is very much the same as the rest of the G-Wagon lineup, including the single big door in the back. I've been living with a Grenadier for about 18 months now, and as much as I was a little confused about the double door arrangement in the back of that Grenadier, I have to admit, I kind of like it a bit better than this idea. From this angle, you can see that Mercedes has really done a good job keeping the mechanical components as high as possible, really allowing this that extra off-road capability that customers have come to expect. One of the things that hasn't changed is the cargo area in the G-Wagen. That means it's a little smaller than you might expect, given the overall dimensions and profile, because we have these pretty big wheel arches here, but it is very practical and very tall. And that's always been one of the things that I've loved about the G-Wagen. On the other hand, if you're looking for a bit more space, you might want to check out something like that Ineos Grenadier. It does have a bigger cargo area, but there's no electric Ineos, even though they kind of promised one by now. And no, your ears are not deceiving you. This does have the best door latch sound on the market. Just check that out. Not quite so pleasing is whatever's going on with the sound generator there under the hood. It kind of sounds oddly artificial and yet a little bit too mechanical at the same time. Not to mention loud. Definitely loud. Despite the changed frame, the seating position is pure G-Wagen, meaning that the door is a little on the small side, especially in the horizontal dimension, but we have an incredibly upright and incredibly tall passenger compartment. So if you're a taller person, it's really easy to find a good driving position. I'll move this seat all the way back and all the way down. So as you can see, you could drive this car with a top hat, probably no problem there. We also have a tilt telescopic steering column with a large range of motion, 3-position memory over there, massaging and ventilating front seats, and a heated steering wheel as well. On the other hand, getting out of the G-Wagen for shorter people might be tricky because we have a relatively wide sill, and then we also have the rock sliders on this model. I have to admit, I've always been a bit surprised about this G-Wagon's lack of rear seat legroom. Yes, it is an improvement on, the old G-Wagons from yesteryear, but it's not exactly generous, and the recline mechanism for the rear seat back is in kind of an odd spot. Scooting over here to the middle seat, I'll try and show you what's going on. It's a lever right here, right there in that seat back, rather than where you might think, which is this little webbing down there, because that is how you lift the seat bottom cushion forward. Of course, if I'm not sitting on it, that would be a lot easier. And then you can tilt the rear seats forward, because this is a classic two-stage rear seat folding mechanism in an SUV that was absolutely not designed for you to do this while you're sitting on the passenger side. Also logically not designed for you to do that while the front seats are any further rearward than really quite forward. This seat is almost all the way back in its track, suitable for a 6'5" passenger. I had up front. I have maybe about 2 inches of legroom left. So interestingly, as big and as boxy as the G-Wagon is, it's not as roomy as you might think in the back. As we look around the interior, let's keep in mind the price tag, which is $178,450. This model started at $161,500, so logically that's more expensive than the G580, but less than the G63. Although there are a lot of different interior color combinations, Mercedes has sent us a model that's definitely black on black on black, so I apologize for the lack of contrast in here. You can see that we do have the upgraded Burmester audio system there, controls for this pretty standard size moonroof just over the driver and front passengers' heads. We have upholstered sun visors with vanity mirrors inside. You can see illuminated, and they do clip out, but they don't extend side to side. That's kind of a omission, I think. Although the doors, as I said, they're not exactly the largest door, and that's really obvious from this position. If you're a taller person, you're going to be sitting kind of like that, with the shoulder belt actually quite far in front of your shoulder. We have 4-way adjustable head restraints. 2 of those ways are manual, 2 of the ways are electric, and then these also have the little butterfly extensions as well. So I guess you could say 6-way adjustable head restraints. We have the automatic inflatable side bolsters. They're going to inflate around a corner. We have massage. We have an extending seat bottom cushion, really adjustable lumbar support, and lots of high quality materials in here. Gone are the days of the G-Wagon with exposed bolt heads and things like that. Instead, everything is just absolutely coated with leather. All the way down there at the bottom of the door, all the way around, everything is just leather, leather, leather. The parts that aren't leather are wood trim like that, some metal speaker grills, and then rather unfortunately, yes, no vehicle is immune from the scourge of the shiny black plastic, so we find plenty of that there as well. We have a grab bar here on the dashboard, just below that airbag, with wood trim there, of course. The sort of turbine-style air vents we see in other Mercedes models. More speakers up there at the top of the dashboard. For a dashboard that's really short like this, it kind of has, I guess something in common with the Jeep Wrangler. I have never seen one done quite this well. And I think the style and even these huge screens that are in the dashboard actually seem to work in here in a way that not every manufacturer has been able to do. So some of the short dashboards just look a little funny to my eye. I think they did a good job with this. Of course, there are still some crazy parts here. So we find metal accents here. We find the cockpit off-road section there. And we find a button that I never thought we would see in an electric vehicle other than maybe ironically, which is this low range button. And yes, as I said before, this is an actual mechanical low range. This is not some sort of EV imitation. We then have the other buttons that require a bit of explanation. So first, in order to get to there, we have to put this in rock crawl mode. So we do that with this little toggle down here. Then we look at the display. We're going to go ahead and approve the activated program. That's going to disable some of the stability and traction control systems. I'm going to have to shift into neutral for this because that is how we actually engage the low range mode. So now the low range mode is engaged, lets you know that other functions have been restricted. We're in neutral, got to put it in drive. The funny thing about this now is that this is the only vehicle I've ever been in with a 2-speed transfer case where it doesn't feel like it at all because it's all electric motors. So you can program it any way they like. Now over here we have tire pressure, we have suspension, we can also see where the power is going. If I go to that screen there, you can see where the power is going, which motor, etc. it is. Then I can engage these 2 buttons. This button here allows you to turn corners tighter than normal by dragging a wheel. This button is that tank turn that I showed you earlier. And its operation is a little peculiar because instead of using the steering wheel, you actually have to leave the steering wheel straight ahead. You then pull the paddle shifter. If you want to go right, pull this paddle shifter if you want to go left, and it's going to tell you what it's going to do right there. So you can see those little arrows there. You then take your foot off the brake pedal, put your foot on the accelerator pedal, and then you start tearing up your driveway, rather unfortunately, like I just did. Down here, we find the controls for the dual zone automatic climate control system. We find a big storage area with a Qi wireless charging slot there. There is a cover that you can drag over the top. That's wood in this model. Two really big cup holders. These are some of the few Mercedes cup holders that don't really seem to interfere with the climate controls there. We have a touchpad for the infotainment system, volume knob, navi map buttons, so basically direct access buttons to certain things in the infotainment system. Our favorite button there, the EQ button that takes you over to range and charging settings, things like that. Back here we have a bifold center armrest cover with a relatively deep storage compartment. None of this has changed for the gasoline or electric versions, other than some of the functionality by the buttons, etc. The structure, that's basically the same, as is the core of the infotainment system. So we have Apple CarPlay there, for instance. We have the native home screens here, your typical interfaces for everything, including the massaging seats, the off-road screens, all of that going on there. The instrument cluster, also basically the same. We don't really find any major changes for the electric vehicle. We have the sport, understated views, classic views, navigation assistance, off-road service, etc. Steering wheel, that yet again is basically the same, including those paddles on the back, because we do have adjustable levels of recuperation. That's what they call their regenerative braking, but none of those modes is a true one-pedal drive mode, unless you're in the off-road modes, and that just seems to be a weird Mercedes thing, because some Mercedes EVs have one-pedal driving, some don't. This is a bicolor steering wheel, so no, your eyes are not deceiving you. It's kind of a two-tone design, and then we have the same headlight controls as the rest of the Mercedes lineup over there on that side. Out on the road, the G580 is undeniably a G-Wagon, but it also feels like there's a bit of Rivian blended in there, if I'm honest. From a stop, if we floor it, it's definitely quick. 0 to 60 in 4 seconds if we're in the right drive mode. Right there, that was the regular drive mode. We'll go ahead and go to Sport. That allows the vehicle to dial the power up to the motors a little bit more rapidly, and you will notice the difference. But Mercedes doesn't give us full output from the motors until you're going about 60 miles an hour. And there's a reason for that, and that's because we don't have any mechanical differentials. And these four motors yield a little bit of torque steer and some unusual feelings in the corners, but it is definitely very, very quick. More surprising though, it also stops quickly, just 110 feet from 60 miles an hour to 0. That number shocked me so much, we tried it a few more times and we got very similar results every single time. Of course, after about 5 or 6 stops like that, the distance did start stretching out, but for emergency stops, if you're out on a road like this and a deer just suddenly jumps in your way, know that you'll stop an awful lot faster than some of the boxy competition. And if you want to know about that boxy competition, stay tuned, because we're going to have a Grenadier versus G-Wagon video coming up really soon. Now, on the handling front, thanks to the low center of gravity provided by that big battery pack, this G-Wagon handles better than you might think. And of course, the instant acceleration from those electric motors really helps make this feel surprisingly engaging, and in some ways maybe a bit more engaging than the AMG G-Wagon, although that does have the soundtrack to go with it. But the other G-Wagons also have a traditional differential setup to go with it as well. And that's where things are a little bit unusual, funky here. If you floor it around the corners, you will get some torque steer, and that's not something you find in the regular G-Wagon because it has regular differentials, and this doesn't have a differential at all, which does mean it feels, again, a bit Rivian-like, because we see that same problem in other quad-motor EVs. We also see a little bit of torque steer in dual-motor EVs, but not quite as much as we find in quad motors. You'll really notice that if you start driving this harder out on some narrower roads, where it surprisingly does well from a grip perspective. The tires, of course, start squealing a little early, but this is a shocking amount of fun given the general size and curb weight, and of course the off-road mission of the G-Wagon. This is a really well done package. You can tell that the Germans spent a lot of time engineering this system. Unfortunately, even German engineering just could not get around the fact that with 4 motors and 4 relatively powerful motors, you're going to get some unusual torque steer and unusual handling feel, especially power on in the corners. Those 4 motors trying to torque vector around, sometimes it just feels unusual. Not bad, just unusual, and you're going to have to get used to it, especially if you have a regular G-Wagon on the side. You know, maybe you have this for your daily commute and you have a G63 for weekends. You are going to notice a difference between the two. Thanks to the independent front suspension and the adaptive dampers, ride quality is fantastic in the G-Wagon. definitely better than G-Wagons of yesteryear that you might be remembering. Whether you're on-road or off-road, this is really quite comfortable. Now, the battery pack probably helps out a little bit because this feels bigger and heavier in a lot of ways than the regular G-Wagon. I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing when it comes to the ride quality. This definitely glides over the bigger imperfections out here on this gravel road, including some of these big potholes that we're going to be popping through here in just a moment. Let's just go right for the potholes and see how this handles it. Steering wheel doesn't jerk like some independent suspensions can, and it doesn't upset the body motion either. Now, we still have that solid axle in the back. Well, not exactly a solid axle in this model, it's a de Dion tube, but you'll get a solid axle, regular solid axle in the rest of the G-Wagon lineup, and I think it's a really well done solid axle. Yes, it can get upset sometimes over broken pavement if you're really pushing your G-Wagon harder, but really who's going to be doing that? Back out on the paved road, cabin noise came in at a quiet 66 decibels in here. Remember, we do have a body-on-frame design, and of course that's 66 decibels on the new scale because they repaved the road that we were testing on. This is definitely a quiet vehicle thanks not only to the body-on-frame design, which provides more isolation, but the fact that we have relatively eco-focused tires on this particular model, and of course lots and lots of sound deadening all the way around. Acoustic laminated glass, lots of sound deadening in the doors, then there's all the leather attached to the doors, etc. This is a really quiet vehicle. Compared to pretty much anything else in the boxy off-road segment, nothing can touch the quietness of this. Even something like a Range Rover is going to have troubles because it's a unibody design, and inherently they're going to have less isolation between the cabin and the frame because they don't have a frame. If you plan on towing, well, not with your electric G-Wagon because this doesn't have a tow rating from Mercedes, at least for the moment, you will also notice a bigger difference because in a G-Wagon, the trailer's connected to the frame. Again, isolation between the frame and the body, so it's going to be a quieter experience in the G-Wagon, and other G-Wagons are rated to tow up to 7,716 pounds, 3,500 kilograms basically. When it comes to fuel efficiency, well, keep in mind this is a big box and it's high off the ground, and efficiency wasn't exactly front of mind for Mercedes when designing this. They were really trying to make this as capable as a regular G-Wagon, and I think that shows in the fuel economy. It's the electric equivalent of a G-Wagon, which can be rated for as low as around 14-15 miles per gallon. In this model, treating it relatively gently on my daily commute, I averaged 1.8 miles per kilowatt hour. That would give you real-world range of about 207 miles if you went from completely full to completely empty. Of course, on a road trip, you're only going to be using about 70% of the battery, so about 140 miles, 150 miles, you're going to need to charge it and then stop and drive another 150 miles, etc., recharge, recharge, recharge. If you treat this very gently, out on level highway at about 65 miles an hour, you can get almost 2 miles per kilowatt hour, which would yield a real-world range score of maybe about 220 miles or so. Again, keep in mind that on a road trip, you're only going to be using 70% of that. But it does charge relatively rapidly and has a very consistent charge curve, something that we've seen in other Mercedes EVs. So your charging sessions, yes, they're going to take a while, but if you want to charge to 90% or even 100%, it's not going to take as long as some EVs. So you could spend that extra time, that extra 30 minutes or so, get all the way full, get the extra 40 or 50 miles if you needed to. This is the kind of EV that has the ability to tackle the obstacles in the back of Beyond. The trouble is going to be, it may be able to get you to the front of Beyond. I don't know about the back of Beyond, but it's going to get you to the front, and you're not really going to be able to do a lot there if you also need to be able to get back home, unless that national park or that off-road park has DC fast charging, and there really aren't many parks like that, at least not at the moment. Rivian is trying to change that, and there are some Rivian chargers out there that you would be able to use with this Mercedes to charge, but certainly keep that in mind if you are the kind of person that's going to take your $150,000, $180,000 EV out to an off-road park. Of course, I would suggest that if that is you, maybe you want to find yourself a lease return G-Wagon so it's a little bit less expensive on your pocketbook, especially when you start damaging your G-Wagon and start needing to repaint it or replace body panels, etc. This is certainly one of the most unique EVs I've ever driven, and it's the only EV I've ever driven with a 2-speed transfer case. So clearly we need to talk about that now. You put it in neutral, you engage rock mode, activate it with your infotainment system there, and then it automatically engages the low range mode, which I'm in now. But unlike basically anything else with an actual low range mode, there's no binding because we have 4 separate motors. There's no mechanical connection at all going on there. And because of the way that Mercedes designed these 2-speed transfer cases, They're basically like little bitty transmissions in each of the four corners of the vehicle. They're very quiet. There's no motor whine, no gear whine, etc. And that's part of the beauty of electric motors. There is a top speed in low ratio mode. I don't know exactly what it is offhand, and I'm not going to achieve it on this road, but that's really the only limitation here. There's no particular reason this couldn't drive down the road in low ratio all the time, other than it's going to affect your efficiency, and that's why we have this. But again, because of the way this system is designed, because there's no mechanical connection, the other motors cannot help out that front right wheel if it was the only one that had traction, for instance. And that's why this needs this particular setup. According to Mercedes, this system is going to try and imitate locking differentials when appropriate, but it's never going to be binding like a traditional four-wheel drive system can. Even dual motor setups with lockers front and rear, those are pretty rare out there, but they do exist. Even those systems can feel unusual. They have a little bit of binding, a little bit of scrabble on road surfaces. This has none of that, regardless of the mode that you're in. Is $178,000 insane? Absolutely. Is there any way for me to talk around that? No, not really. This is a big, expensive SUV EV that has really one mission: to be the ultimate electric Mercedes off-roader. Is it the ultimate electric off-roader? That's difficult to say because the capability level here is so high, we'd be risking body damage and we'd have to get a Rivian R1S to answer that question because it's the closest thing you can get to this. Now, an R1S will go a lot further on a charge. It also will have a bigger battery pack, but it is a bigger SUV as well. And that's one of the advantages to the G-Wagen is its size. It's, kind of Bronco, kind of Wrangler sized-ish. On the inside, it's a bit more practical than some of those because of the really tall ceiling, something I also like about the Grenadier that we have as a long-term vehicle. The major complaint here is the range. It's not terribly long. In daily driving, it's about 200 miles. For the average owner, that's not really going to be a problem. But if you want to road trip this, keep in mind that you're going to stop for 30 minutes to gain about 170, 180 miles of highway range, and that could be a bit of a bummer. It is going to charge relatively rapidly, but not as rapidly as some. Also, the onboard charger at 9.6 kilowatts is oddly slow for modern EVs in North America. A lot of modern EVs, especially EVs at this end of the price spectrum, are going to charge at 11.5 or even some at 22 kilowatts connected to AC power. So at home, this is going to charge a little bit slower than some. On the other hand, it is absolutely the most unique EV that I can think of outside of a Rolls-Royce electric vehicle or perhaps some of those ultra exotic EVs out there. I bet no one on your block is going to have a G580. There may be a number of Rivian R1Ss and R1Ts on your block, but you're probably going to be the only one with a G580. And I have to admit, if I were to buy a G-Wagen, as much as I find a problem with some of the driving nature of this, I don't like the torque steer. I think the steering is a little bit funky under power, etc. I have to admit, if I were going to buy a G-Wagen, this is absolutely the G-Wagen I would get because it has better handling ability than the rest of the lineup. It has bonkers acceleration for what it is, and it's going to be easy to live with. Well, easy to live with in air quotes, because again, $178,000. Let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section below. And would you get one of these, or would you just get a regular G-Wagen and maybe some other electric vehicle? Because of course, for the price tag of this, you could get a regular G, and you could also get, I don't know, insert any of those inexpensive EVs in this equation, or you could get yourself, a Mercedes-Benz EQE, and, another electric vehicle for weekends away. There are a lot of choices, but none of them are going to be quite this unique. Let me know, and I'll see all of you later.